All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Wednesday, May 4th. My name is Chris Latham. I am the course director for Game Music Composition. Welcome to this month. We have a lot to discuss in our first session this afternoon. We're going to be talking about the class as a whole and what to expect from the materials and the assignments and all of the topics that we will discuss from week to week. We'll talk about how our class sessions will be going down on Wednesday and Friday, and we'll certainly get into the first week's assignments in detail. But there is a bit of overview and discussing how we are going to approach the month and approach the topic. So, our class this afternoon is, where did I go? Is a little bit different. Ooh, we don't need that. This class this afternoon is going to be a little bit different than the rest of our Wednesday sessions because there is a bit of introductory material, but we will be getting into your class assignments starting next Wednesday after you have done your first round of assignments. We will be doing a bit of in-class listening and peer review of those submissions, so you get the opportunity for us to go through it in a kind of a live video setting. And if you're in the live classes, then you can certainly participate and ask any sort of questions, and I can clarify any aspects of the assignment overall. The archives for the class, if you are unable to make the class, and of course if you missed the first one, then you've already found the archives, but they will be released the next day on Wednesday, and well, I do have to teach on Saturday, so they'll either be after my morning lecture or maybe I can get them compressed and uploaded by Friday night. But soon, the day after, I will submit the class archives. They show up in your FSO inbox. So look out for those, and we'll be discussing a wide variety of things. So your Wednesday classes are typically more about the assignments. So starting next week, we'll talk about all of the assignments that you just turned in, and then we'll be looking at all of the new assignments for this week. So after we get through the introductory material about the class as a whole, we'll get into our week one assignments. Then on our Friday classes, those are a discussion of topics dealing with the industry and projects and working as a music composer on a game project. So as a whole, the class is designed to introduce you to this side of the industry, introduce you to being a music composer working on a game project, and show you that your music is just as viable in a game as it is in any other format. Whether it's a music album, whether it is commercial work, whether it's on television or in a film. There are certainly unique aspects about how music works with the game. When working on a game project, there are certain aspects that are the same to the film industry, where you are following a visual image and you are supporting what the viewer is seeing, but there's also a layer of interactivity with the game itself. The player has a controller in their hand or a mouse and a keyboard, and they are doing actions, they are solving puzzles, they are jumping on different platforms, they're defeating the enemies, they're whatever the different types of game it is, whether they have a controller or a mouse and a keyboard, or they have a mobile device in their hand. But there is some interactivity with the game itself. So the game is doesn't exist really in its final form until somebody plays the game. So there's this level of interactivity where the game turns on and the player reacts to the game and they hit buttons on the controller and then the game reacts to what the player does. And it's this constant feedback loop going around and around and constantly playing and updating itself to provide the game experience. And so our music needs to react to what the player does. So we'll be talking about how music exists in a game and how you create music for a gameplay experience that doesn't exist yet, and it's unique for each player. So depending on the type of game it is and how typically more modern and advanced games have a really custom experience where some people fly through a game as fast as possible and the content needs to go just flying by them. They might even skip or pass certain aspects of the sound and music. Other people will sit in one spot in a game, or it takes them a really long time to solve the puzzle, or they're lost in the game and the music needs to go around and around and constantly play for long periods of time. It might take somebody 5 minutes to solve a game level, or it might take somebody an hour to do it. It might take somebody a day to beat a game. It might take somebody weeks to beat a game. So the music experience is different for each different person that plays them. Sometimes it's a little bit different. Sometimes it's very different. And so your music needs to change in reaction to what that player is doing. So we'll be talking about how you build a music soundtrack when you're not sure exactly what's going to happen. You know what is possible because you're part of the game team that made the game. So there are boundaries. I mean, a lot of the newer games really feel big and infinite and that like you are in control of your own hero and your own story. But they often are like mazes or puzzles that you have to go through a linear path. Some of them are not linear experiences. And so your music needs to change and react to that. And this idea of linear versus nonlinear is one of those what we're going to discuss in depth, where how is the music certainly different than pretty much all of the other music that you've listened to or created. Most music exists in a linear format where there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. And every time you rewind back that song, you're going to hear the same beginning, middle, and end. It's going to, every time you watch a movie, there is a 2-hour long audio file that's the exact length of the movie, and you rewind it back and you play it through and you hear the same experience every single time. And so when you go record your album, you pay close attention. You go into for the recording process, and so you pay a lot of attention to, well, hopefully songwriting and the creation of the song, the composition of the song. You record it. You pay attention to very close focus on the performance of the song, the instrumentation, microphones, and the recording gear, and capturing that perfect sound. Then you go into the mix process and you take all of the tracks and you edit them down, you format them into this final perfect 2-track stereo mix that everybody listens to. And you listen to it over and over and over again, and you craft your EQs and your compressors and your mix and your automation and your plugins, and you create this final perfect version of the song that you put on a CD or you put it on the internet, and everybody listens to that one exact version of the song. But in a video game, everybody who plays the game should have at least a slightly different experience. Sometimes it's wildly different. So the music has to react to that. Music in a game, there is not just one audio file that goes from the beginning to the end of a game and plays in the same way every single time. Games can be a very long experience. Sometimes they're real short. You bring out your mobile phone and you play a game level for a little while and you put it away and you're done in 5 minutes. Other games people play for hours on end, or 10 or 20 or 50. Games have hundreds of hours of content. You get into multiplayer online games and they just keep going and going. So that doesn't mean that there is a 100-hour long audio file sitting on the game disc somewhere that just plays from the beginning to the end like it does in a movie or a music album. Music for a video game exists in lots of little pieces and parts. Wave files that are, some of them play only one time, some of them loop, they connect together and create the full music experience that you end up hearing. And so instead of having one 5-minute long song, you have different sections of a song that can even be separated out into drums and bass and harmony and melody and rearranged in different orders to create and react to whatever the game is doing. So we'll talk about the role of a music composer in the game industry. How do you find clients? Who hires you? Who has approval? It is certainly can be thought of like a film in that way, where it is a team effort. It's not in. Often can be the case in the music industry where you are the artist, you are the sole source of the music and the music album. Maybe there's a team supporting that musical creation, but often there is an artist or a band that has creative direction, or producer or record label, however you want to define it. But with a movie and certainly a video game, you have a client, you have a game team, a game developer that is making the game. They often really don't speak the language of music, or at least understand it to the depth that you do. And often you don't understand the technology and all of the inner workings of the game and the software in the way that they do. And working together, you can create a musical soundtrack for their entire game experience. But it is certainly a team effort involved. There is the creative aspects to everything and the technical aspects. That occurs in music production also, right? You could spend your entire life on one side of the glass, being the musician, being the session player, being the drummer, the keyboardist, the vocalist, the guitarist, whatever instrument, and just sit in the world of songwriting and theory and composition. And that is certainly a lifelong kind of a path of knowledge. It's certainly a wealth of experience and skill in all of that side of things. But often artists and musicians come into the recording studio, kind of come on to the other side of the glass, where they're talking about the console and the microphones and the tape machine and the DAW and plugins and effects processors and racks of outboard gear. And there's a whole technical side to the creation of music and recording a music album. And a lot of people coming through this degree program come at it from those different directions, where they either understand the music, they've been playing an instrument, they've been playing in bands, they understand theory and the creation of music, and they want to understand a little bit more about the tech and the production side of it in capturing their best performance and making their music or their album be a professional product. And there are those that are coming from the tech side that are in the land of the DAW and synths and plugins, and they can create music from the actual technology, but they want to understand how to control it better and write better music. And you understand the world of theory and composition, more of that side. Here in the chat it says lost audio. It looks like I'm still broadcasting on my side. Has everybody lost me? I just want to always check that. All right, back. Excellent. So, what I'm getting at here is there is a creative side and technical side to a lot of different types of music, and games are certainly a part of that also. There is the whole creative side, and in certainly more of the beginning stages of your career, you are the music composer and you create the music. That's entirely your domain. Your focus is to fulfill all of the story and narrative and characters and the twists and turns of the story and fill it with music. And then you basically send all of your music off to the game team and they put it into the game. But there's also a technical aspect. It's kind of like giving somebody else your music to mix. They might have more skills in mixing and create a better product than you ever could, or they don't know what they're doing or don't understand your intentions with the music, and you end up realizing that if you just understood how all the tech worked, then maybe you could end up doing it better, even better for yourself, or faster or cheaper, or whatever it is. So a lot of folks dabble in both sides of the creative side and the technical side for both music production and games. So I'll go back again to say that we'll talk about the role of the music composer working with a game team. We'll talk about the creative approaches of how do you find a client, how do you find a project, how do you determine what music is necessary for that project, how do you figure out the style and the genre and how much music you need and how much to figure out like the scope of the project and how much to charge a client, and figure out just like how to manage the game project as a whole. And then once you start creating more and more music, then it has to start making its way into the game. And we'll get into, towards the second half of the month, a bit more of the technical side. We'll talk about some of the tools, some of the software that's involved to actually get your WAV files working in the game. A lot of music composers that want to move over in the game industry, right? A lot of folks, they make music in some form. They either perform in bands or a live musician, or they sit in their studios and make music. Some of them, folks become music composers, music producers. They work on film projects, television projects, and then games become available. And hey, there's this part of the industry that I want to tackle and get into maybe some of the music and sound effects that are happening in games. And they understand audio, they understand music. I understand how to create music and make bounce out WAV files and have things loop, and I understand the DAW and the production side of things, but I don't know how to take those WAV files and actually get them into a game so when the player hits a button on the controller or does some action, that it actually works and plays back the correct piece of music or the correct sound effect. So there is often can be a technical hurdle of how to actually get your music working in a game. And so we'll talk some of the tools. We'll talk about game engines, things like the Unreal Engine and the Unity Engine. Maybe you've heard those words before. If you play games, then you might have seen those words or logos. It's kind of like saying I used Pro Tools or Logic to record my album. Saying I built my game in the Unreal Engine, or I built my game in the Unity Engine, is a core piece of software technology that is used. We'll talk about audio middleware like Fmod and Wise. One of the great things about all of these software out there is that they're all free, free to download, free to use. And for certainly our educational purposes, free to work with our projects. And so we'll be talking about all sorts of aspects of the industry as a whole. That's the direction that the month will take through our classes and through our assignments. I do want to throw out 2 disclaimers pretty early on in the month before we really get started with everything. And that is, number 1, you don't actually have to be any good at video games to be successful in this class. Your ability to play a video game, to play it well, or to get the high score or the fastest time, or have played games in any sort of recent memory, is not of importance in this class. The skills that are important are your skills that you've been learning throughout all of your classes coming up to this point. your skills of music production, understanding music theory, composition, instrumentation, being comfortable in your DAW and writing music and plugins and synths and sample libraries and all of the tools that you've been working on up through to this class. Your ability to take a client's project and intention and realize music and render it into music from their description and their intention. Clients often, especially game clients, right? So, sort of like working with film or television, anybody who is not a musician, they don't necessarily speak in music terms, so they often speak in terms of previous projects out there, previous games. A lot of people can't tell you what they want with their music, but they know what they like when they hear it. So having temp tracks and demo tracks and getting a sort of control of their ideas and creative direction is certainly a core part of it. So you will have a series of games that you'll be working on over the course of the month. Each week there is a new game. They are fully working Mac games that don't have any music or sound effects, or they start out with the default ones, but your job is to create all of the music and sound effects for these games. So by the end of the month, you will have 3 fully functioning Mac games with all of the audio as your custom music and sound. Each game has a different need for audio and music, and a different approach to how the music works in the game. They're each different types of games, different genres, and that requires different musical approaches. So perfect for demo material to be used on a portfolio. We'll be doing video captures of everything, so you'll have movies to show off. And so each week, in week 1, 2, and 3, right? 3 games through the month, week 1, 2, and 3. We don't have a game in week 4 because we don't have a week 5 to do revisions for it and to finish it off. Each week you'll start out with the original composition, and then the next week you will have a possibility to do revisions on all of your assignments. But we'll get into that also. So let me go back to saying that my first disclaimer was you don't actually have to be any good at playing video games to be successful in this class, because you're not, yes, we have games to work with, but your focus and your projects are centered around your music composition and delivery of the correct audio files. So, because I know people going through this class have a wide variety of experiences with games. There are those that eat and live and breathe video games and play games all the time and are up on the newest and latest technology. I typically say, I probably shouldn't say play video games all the time, because as soon as you get into the serious degree program, the speed of everything picks up and there's a little bit less time overall for playing video games. But know what's going on out there, pays attention to the industry, and is interested in getting into the game industry. But I also know that there are folks coming through this class that haven't been playing video games since maybe they were throwing quarters into a Pac-Man machine, or they were playing solitaire on their PC or chess or something like that, and that is perfectly fine also. Again, it is all about the creation of the music and the soundtrack, and your ability to play the game, get the fastest time or the highest score or anything like that is not important. Now, if you haven't been playing games, through the course of this month, we will be immersing you in the game industry, and we have games for you to play, and we encourage you to go out and find new games to play. And certainly it's all well and good to play the video games, but it's also about listening to it with a critique's ear. I want to say creative, but critical ear. That's the word I'm looking for. Where you're listening to the music and how it works in the game, and how the game is interacting with the music and the music is interacting with the game. So we'll be getting into all of those aspects. And the other big disclaimer that I want to mention is one of the questions that pops up pretty early in all of this is, do I need to know code, or I need to be able to program to be able to work as a music composer in games? And that is certainly not the case. Of course, any skill that you have will certainly make you more valuable overall, but finding programmers that can play music or compose, or finding composers that can program, are typically a very rare thing. Those are completely two lifelong paths of study that typically don't cross all that much. Certainly in early video game times, the only way that the game was playing music was that it was actually coded directly into the game. This is going back to Atari and Intellivision and the original Nintendo, and exactly here in the chat, bleeps and bloops. It was simple waveforms. It was absolutely amazing, the technology, but it was way tech heavy overall. And it became, as games got more mature and larger and more experience in the industry, they became obvious that your programmers probably aren't going to write your best music, and your musicians are probably not going to write your best code. So typically it is working on two sides of the coin, or what's often known as two sides of the fence, where you're throwing things back and forth between the creative and technical. Because on the creative side, we're right there with the graphics folks, animators, artists, 2D art, 3D art, and all of the different aspects of that. And then there's the tech folks that get into all of the code and make all of our art and audio work together. So it became very obvious that those paths don't intersect all that much. So it's, again, I go back to the musician that wanders their way into the control room and starts learning the console and the microphones and the technology. Typically that's not where you start out, but as you work more and more with different game projects and you kind of get more experience, you start learning the technology. It's kind of like learning your DAW, learning plugins, and how it all works together to get your best recording or your best production. So there is that technical aspect, but being able to dive directly deep into the code is certainly not a skill set that is immediately required or should stop you from getting involved in the industry. So definitely want to get those out there. You don't have to be any good at video games to be successful in this class, but you do have to be successful at making music, and coding and programming, while a wonderful skill, is not necessarily required early on in the industry. All right. So what else can I talk about? Me. Here I am. My name's Chris Latham. Again, I am the course director. I've been with Full Sail for about 14 years now. I started over in the recording arts department before there was a music production department, and did my history before Full Sail was post-production, music and audio for commercials, radio, television, and then moved in with Full Sail, started in the studios, teaching the consoles and the recording process. And about maybe 8 years ago now, the game industry really changed. Well, probably about 10 years for the game industry, really opened up with the technology and made it much more available to the public, and made tools that you could get your hands on and start working with games. And I had always been a lifelong gamer and loved all aspects of audio, recording, and music and composition, and then I wanted to figure out how I could actually play more video games and work more on games, because I'm just playing video games all the time. Certainly, the family doesn't enjoy that part too much. So, but if I can make money off of it at the same time, then it becomes work, and then it's much more directly in part of what I'm actually doing. So I started shifting over towards games. Have found way more opportunity in video games than I ever have found in the recording industry or production work or other aspects that I've worked in. Here in the chat, did I work on BioShock? No. This is from the Game Developers Conference. This is there's a Big Daddy that was from Take-Two Interactives. They have their booth at the Game Developers Conference, and the thing was super huge, so I had to take a picture with it. But the ways to contact me for the class, iChat and email is probably the best way of getting in contact with me, because I am teaching on campus on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and I am teaching this class from home on Wednesday and Friday. So I'm not often at my desk phone. So you can call and leave me a voicemail, but if you leave a voicemail, then please also send me an email. That way I can respond much quicker in those forms. So beyond that, I have external game contracting company called EngineAudio.com. You can find me on Twitter at EngineAudio, and we'll be talking about how to find work and clients and working with all sorts of different folks. So here's some of the projects, game projects that I've worked on over the years. Currently working on a underwater multiplayer game called Depth. It is it's available on Steam. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Steam game store. It's a kind of like the app store for games for Mac and PC. But doing music and sound effects for those. Then EA Sports is here in Orlando, and been lucky enough to work with them on a number of occasions. So we're working on Madden 17 and some NBA currently. So lots of outside work happening also. And so whatever part of the industry, I guess where I'm going with all of this stuff is whatever part of the industry you are interested in, whether it is music or certainly games, the hardware, software, technology. And I, of course, can nerd out on the games industry all day long with you and talk about all sorts of different aspects of that. There's a lot going on and a lot of very cool availability. Like I said, I've found just way more opportunity in the games industry than I ever did in any of the other industries. So some of the goals of the class overall, number one, of course, is to write music. That's kind of the whole point of the degree, is to be writing as much music as possible and building out your portfolio and demo reel and gathering up as much material you can to show off future clients and future employers. And so, like I said, we have games each week that require a music soundtrack, that require you to build the music in a certain format. So we will be discussing how to build those. Play video games, certainly another point of the class. I have a very important concept in this class called game research. And game research means you should be playing video games, more video games, and paying attention to how they work and how the music and audio work and who made the game and the industry as a whole. Game research is very important. You need to be keeping up with the industry as a whole and what is the cool game out there and why is it popular and what technology are they using and who is the music composer and all sorts of aspects. It's really a necessity for whatever industry you are interested in, right? If you are interested in the music industry, if you want to be an artist, if you want to be a composer, you want to be a producer, then you need to be paying attention to the music industry You need to be paying attention to what's popular out there, what's good out there, why are good things not always the popular things, and why are popular things not always good overall? Why does bad music make so much money, and why does good music sometimes not? And all of those fun conundrums, and paying attention to artists and producers and record labels and studios and the technology and recording studio that they recorded the album in, and the record labels, and every aspect that you can about the music industry. And if you are interested in the film industry, that means you should be watching films and paying attention to films and figuring out who the director is and who the composer is, and who the production company was, and where did they film it, and any sort of behind the scenes that you can get your hands on. It just so happens in the game industry, you're playing video games. Same deal. You need to be up on the industry and the companies and the technology and the games, and who's making what, and how are they doing it. So there's a lot of resources out there to do that. And like I said, if nothing else, we'll be immersing you in the industry this month to give you a sense if you like it or not. So if a game opportunity comes up, you can say, hey, I now know that I really don't like that type of work. And or, man, that really kind of interests me a whole lot, and I'm kind of interested in following it up further and figuring out where to go with it. So in all of that music and video game playing, there will be some learning involved in all of that. There's actually a lot to be learned and a lot of knowledge to be had because of it encompasses so much of the technology, of music, of the visual aspects, the interactivity with the player, and then the industry and the money behind it and how it all works. There's just a lot to be interested in. So we'll be talking about all of these things and more over the course of the month. But let's get into our first week's round of assignments. We'll talk about the assignments and how they work, and then I'll get into the specifics about each assignment as we go. So let me take a quick pause here before we get into this. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them up in the chat. Yes, my fail kid here. That don't do this. Don't take it directly on your nose and wait too late to swing the bat. So hold on just a sec. All right. So, getting into our assignments. The first thing I want to talk about is how to be successful in this class. And step one is don't fail. And that's, of course, that's not the correct way of going about that or correct way of saying that. But really what I'm getting at is how to be successful in this class and how to avoid finding failure. So the point made here is that this kid waited a little too long to swing the bat and got hit right in the face with it. So don't wait. The first suggestion here to be successful in this class is don't wait to download your assignments and get access to them, especially because of how the schedule is set up this month. Starting here on Wednesday, you have a lot of opportunity in the beginning of the week to download the assignments and read through them, try them out, see if you run into any issues or have any questions, and then bring up those questions in class. So step one certainly would be to download all of the material. Hold on here. Let me go to FSO. Come on, FSO. Go faster. Hold, please. It's coming. Not very quickly, but it's coming. Online. All right, I think that did it. Here is FSO. And after some of the introductory material here, you can download all of your assignments. We have Game Composition, our 2D platformer. This is typically our biggest assignment each month, and we'll be talking about that in depth. It's our first game. Session Preparation talks about an approach of how you might approach building a session for 2D platformer, kind of overview of how you can actually work through the assignment. Each week you have the opportunity to do a bit of, have your submission available for us to check it in our live class. So a little bit of feedback and peer review. Please submit your assignment for this, and on our next Wednesday class, we'll load it up and listen to all of the submissions. This will give, if you're able to come for the live class, then you can ask any questions, and we can kind of go back and forth and clarify anything that you need. Even if you can't make the live sessions, submit it anyway, and I'll do a video feedback of everything and talk my way through it. You'll probably get a lot more detail that way. So it's good for the individual on their own project, but it's also good for everybody else because you will see things that you would have never thought of, either good or bad, like, oh, you probably should avoid doing this, or hey, this is a really cool idea, let's try more of that. And you will be able to see all sorts of different ideas and approaches of how your fellow students worked on this game project. So definitely a good approach. Everybody will be getting their own individual written grade sheet and feedback. So I will do that for your composition. But of course, having it in an online video format can make things a bit clearer sometimes. Your technical assignment and production techniques, those are also some of the main assignments that you will come across each week, and we'll get into those. Your Wednesday and Friday virtual class, those are links for this class. Each week there is a 20-question quiz that are typically based off of the Friday sessions and the slides, so you can download the slides. You probably get a lot of information directly from the slides, or else I will just clarify it also in the live class. And if you check out the slides ahead of time and try to do some of the questions on the quiz and you're missing a piece of information, then you can ask in Friday's class and we can address that also. Oh, look, I have 2 week 1 optional revisions. Looks like I added one accidentally. Oh, I'm sorry. This is peer review. I'm reading that wrong. I'll get to there. Quiz, suggested reading and viewing, just some extra resources, also information from the book that can help with just the topics that we discuss. The discussion, it's an unweighted but open-ended question of what games are you playing, what games are you interested in, what's your favorite game, what's your favorite musical experience, all of those things. And then each week you have the opportunity to do revisions. This is probably the other best way that people find success in this class, is that they end up doing revisions. So you will get grades and feedback for your game composition and your technical assignment and your production technique, all of the weighted assignments. And after you get those grades and feedback, you can take all of the assessment and make your changes, update your assignments. Your technical assignments and your production techniques are typically kind of a workflow or step-by-step assignments to work on some aspect of the game. And after you get the feedback for that, those are pretty easy changes to update and make the fixes. The game composition is more about the overall approach of your music composition, and there are a lot of changes and a wide variety of stuff with that. And you'll get a grade sheet, and you can make all of those suggestions and that feedback, take all of that, and make the updates and changes and resubmit it. And so sometimes your grades in the beginning, the first round, may not be exactly where you want them to be. And so you can make any and all changes to update. And they typically have a really solid, good swing in a positive direction after making those changes to end up getting a good grade throughout the month. Here in the chat, we got a question. Are there any major differences when working on different genres of video games? Yes, there are typically some pretty big changes from the difference between a puzzle game to a first-person shooter action game to a massively online multiplayer game to maybe a kid's game or a racing game. Now, within those categories, there are some similar elements, right? There are like, for all horror movies, there are certain like tropes and plot points that you hit, and the music is often set up in a certain way. So there are certain things, established ideas and concepts that you can rely on in a particular genre, but they might then vary from one genre to the next. We'll be talking about different game genres and their kind of musical expectations for that type of game. And it's also like mixing music or even songwriting or composing music, where every single song or every single mix is unique. And if you put a different person in that DAW session or on a mixing console, they'll turn the knobs in a slightly different way and they'll hit different buttons and create a different sound. And same thing with a game soundtrack. Even though one game might be similar to the next, their underlying musical approaches and how they did it might be different. So there can certainly be a lot of similarities, but there can also be a lot of differences in those musical approaches. All right, so that is definitely suggestion number one, is to download all of the assignments as soon as you can. Has anybody here in the chat, have you downloaded the game? Have you checked out our first game for the week? Definitely want to do that. Let's see here. What's next? Here's the breakdown. Probably just saw that on FSO, but 10% from the game composition, 5% from technical assignment, 5% from production technique, 5% from each of the 20 question quizzes each week. That comes to a total of 25% each week for 4 weeks, is 100% of your grade. So the composition is typically your biggest assignment, and then your technical assignment and your production technique are based off of the main game composition that you do. We saw your technical assignment this week is delivering assets in multiple different formats. When you work on a game, you will often deliver your music in high resolution, maybe 24-bit 48K, and then you'll deliver it at a lower resolution 22K. Maybe that's for the website, and then you have to deliver core audio files because it's also going on an iOS mobile game. So you might have to take the same piece of music and render it into multiple different formats. So we'll be talking about all of the details and the formatting of the files that's absolutely necessary to make it work in the game. Your production technique this week is a looping assignment. Looping music is extremely important in games, and it allows you to sit in one spot musically, basically waiting for the player to solve the puzzle or to they're lost and they're just kind of wandering around, and the music needs to loop around and around and around. So we will talk about different approaches to looping music to make it a little bit more invisible overall. Let's see. What's next? Here in the chat, we got 2 yeses for did you actually download and play the game? Excellent. We're going to get into the games here. We're going to talk more about it. You've already played 2D platformer a little bit, got to see the overall approach for it. So let's talk here about our first game. Hold on, let me take another just quick pause here, and we'll get started. So I have here the game itself. So this is your first game this week. This is called 2D Platformer. It is called 2D Platformer because it is a 2D game, meaning that it only scrolls left and right. You don't actually like go into the image in any sort of 3D manner. And it is called a 2D platformer because it is a platform game. Platform games have a long history in gaming. And the main point of platform games is running and jumping from different platforms, and often shooting and punching or something like that. So they have their history in Super Mario Brothers, or Donkey Kong, or Metroid, or Mega Man. Some modern games like Limbo and what's that? Oni and the Blind Forest looks like a really cool one. But all sorts of classic games, and it's a pretty good approach to start out with because it's a pretty simple game overall. It's not very big or complex. The need for the music and the sound effects are pretty straightforward, and it gives us a pretty easy introduction overall to the process. So right here, right in the beginning of the video, you see this logo that says powered by Unity. And the games are all this month built in the Unity game engine. And the Unity game engine, like I said, it's kind of like saying Pro Tools or Logic. It's the main tool that you use to build your game. It's not just for audio, it's for graphics and the programming and every aspect of the game. Unity Games, to show off their games and their technology, they made this very simple game called 2D Platformer. And it's available for free, and we just set it up for custom music and sound effects. So by the end of this, you are going to create a music soundtrack that plays through the whole game and replace all of the sound effects. I think there are 18 sound effects in this game. Let's talk about the music and the genre and the style and the overall just musical approach for the soundtrack. As you can see, it's a pretty ridiculous game. It's lighthearted and silly and not too serious. And it's the overall idea here is that the alien invasion has taken over London. I think the alien ship here, this is London Bridge, has fallen down. The alien ship has landed. There's Big Ben over here on the right-hand side that is broken, and the London Eye is broken. So, and of course, the only person to save London from the alien invasion is you, and your character is a bean with a monocle and a mustache and a top hat and a bazooka. And actually, I don't think it's a top hat. I think it's a bowler hat. But you are going to defend this from the alien horde that is invading with your trusty bazooka. So you will be creating all of the music for this. And so the music also is going to be a little bit silly and lighthearted. It's probably an all ages, family friendly game. It doesn't need to be too dark and depressing and serious. And there's interesting aspects of aliens and an alien invasion, and the fact that it's set in London might have a British influence also. So there's a lot of different directions you can go with this. Let's go over to some of the documentation. When you download the assignment, you get that video, you get the actual game application, and you get some of the documentation here. A PDF, the music design document, and this is going to give you a lot of information overall about the game and how the music is going to be set up. Project overview, talking about the music and the soundtrack and what you're going to be building. Kind of summarizes a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about now. Game overview talks about the game itself and kind of where it came from. 2D platformer games have a long pedigree in the game industry. Classics like Super Mario Bros., Donkey Kong, Metroid were 2D platformer games to modern varieties like Limbo, Braid, Jetpack Joyride. Musical style, maybe something like Monty Python meets Mars Attacks, or Benny Hill versus the Body Snatchers. There might be a little bit of a silly, campy British influence, or alien kind of campy alien invasion influence. The instrumentation itself, I kind of leave up to you. The genre of the game, I leave up to you. Whatever style or musical approach you want to take is okay, but there is a couple of boundaries here. Certainly, each cue needs to have, your entire composition needs to have drums, bass, harmony, and a strong, identifiable melody. And that melody is going to extend across multiple different wave files, and we'll talk about how the music is actually going to be built from the wave files. So the instrumentation is up to you. There should definitely be a strong rhythmic pattern. Everything should be upbeat and kind of a faster tempo. Makes you want to move and fight in the game. It should be lighthearted, like here, major keys in the chat. That's certainly a good overall approach. I do have some examples that I will be playing here to give us some things to listen to. So lighthearted, fun, upbeat, up-tempo kind of poppy music. The actual format for everything. So let's talk about what you're actually going to end up creating. The final delivery for this assignment will be a series of WAV files. You'll actually be creating a total of 9 WAV files for this game. And those 9 WAV files are divided out into 3 different categories. 3 intros, 3 main loops, and 3 endings. And this idea, the idea that we're focusing on, is intros, loops, and endings. That's a very, very common approach to music and sound effects in a game. Intros give you a way to start from nothing and to lead up into the loop. The loop is going to go around and around as long as it needs to, and in this case it's going to go through 3 different loops and randomize between those 3. And when we're done, then it's not just going to cut and stop everything off. It's going to resolve nicely in a choice of one of the 3 endings. So a total of 9 WAV files. This asset list is very, very important because it allows you to, or it tells you exactly what the files need to be named. Formatting of the files is extremely important. The game, even though it does some really cool things, it's actually really kind of stupid overall in the fact that it doesn't know if you formatted things incorrectly, it's just not going to work, and it's just not going to recognize the file. The game actually in the code is programmed somewhere to accept only these 9 files, so that they're named capital M music underscore capital I intro underscore 01 dot wave. So naming of the files needs to be exact. Notice the intro files are 2 bars long, the main loop files are 8 bars long, and the ending files are 2 bars long. The sample rate is going to be 44.1. Bit depth is going to be 16-bit, and the channels, you have stereo files. So that's obviously very common, 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. The intro files do not loop. The ending files do not loop. They only play once as an intro and once as an ending. But the main loops, they loop around and around, and we'll talk about how that creates most of the soundtrack that you hear while you play the game. So let's go back to the video here. Where did that go? There we go. Let's do the mouse. Move this out of the way, bring this up here, and bring this back in. Okay. So this is how the music works. When the game starts, the player kind of drops down, and the intro starts exactly when the music's. The intro starts exactly when the game starts, right? So intro starts playing right there, and it's going to play for 2 bars. And actually, the game doesn't even know it's 2 bars. It just waits till the end of the file, and when it reaches the end of the file, it's going to play one of the 3 main loop files. So the game starts, and the game knows that there are going to be 3 intro files, and it randomly chooses one of those 3 intro files. So let's say it chooses intro 3. It plays that for 2 bars, and when it reaches the end, it knows that there are 3 main loop files. It randomly chooses one of those 3, let's say it chooses main loop 1, and plays it for 8 bars. Once it reaches the end of main loop 1, it can randomly jump off to any of the other ones, and it could go into 3, and then it could go to 2, then it could go back to 1 again, then it could go back to 2, then it could go back to 1, it could go back to 1 again. It could just jump around in any sort of order. So let me play some examples here to give kind of a clarify some of what I'm talking about here. Campus, no. Online. 2D platformer. Let's get logic up here. All right, these are 4 student examples. And let me just kind of organize this here. We've got 3 8-bar main loops. We got 3 intros. Intro, intro, intro. And 3 endings. Okay. Now, let me just clarify this a little bit more like that. And we just got 1 here. Drag these a little closer to each other. Set this up. All right. So, 3 main loops, 3 intros, and 3 ending files. Each one of them is each one of the main loops is set up to loop. The intros are going to play only 1 time. The endings will play 1 time. So let me just create another track here, and the intro up here. Hold on. The game will randomly choose one of these intros. So let's say it chooses intro 2. And make a copy instead. Let me make a copy. Then it randomly chooses one of these. Let's say it does main loop 3. Then it could go to main loop 1. Then it could go to 2. Then it could go back to 1. And eventually, let's just play this and see if we can kind of identify what we're hearing here. Let's see. Output. Make sure we can hear this. All right. Let's mute this one out. Let's see if we can hear this first. Just give me a heads up in the chat. Can you hear the music playing along with my voice also? Hopefully that's working for you. Excellent. Okay, so we have an intro and music loop 3. The challenge here is that any of these 3 intros can connect to any one of these main loops in any sort of order. And then the main loops can shuffle around and connect in any sort of order. Whenever you reach the end of one of these cues, it either can jump off to the other ones or it can loop back and play back to the front. So you have to make sure that all of these connect together and they make sense when the end of one reaches the beginning of the next. Probably one of the main ways to do this is to resolve back to the tonic. That way you know that towards the end of any cue, if you go off and kind of head off through your chord progression, you might resolve or land on the 4, the 5, or the 6, or the minor third, or something like that, well, depending on your progression. But you should probably always land back on the 1 or start your loop on the 1 so that it makes it a pretty safe place to connect and doesn't feel like maybe a strong key change. The end of your intro cues need to seamlessly tie into any of the main loops. The purpose of the intro is to introduce the music, to create a build, to kind of rise and build up the anticipation, kind of maybe hanging on a 4 or the 5 before it drops back to the 1, leading into one of the main loops. So let's try this. Each cue should have rhythm, melody, harmony, strong chord progression. There should be slight changes from one cue to the next. Here we go, to 1. This is how you're going to create most of the soundtrack as the game is looping around, right? So game plays. The music will just be switching in the background, going from one cue to the next. Here's main loop 2. It's going to go back to main loop 1. Again, it can just rearrange in whatever order, and you have to compose the music so it all feels like one song. It needs to feel like the same drums, same bass, same melody, same harmony, not the same composition, but the same instrumentation. And then at some point, you are going to lose all of your health points, right? So Mr. Bean here has a little health meter at the top. And if he loses all of his health and you lose a life, you fall off the level and the game is over at that point. And so we need to have ending cues. Let's see, right about here, right? Boom, he's lost all of his health. He falls into the muck below, and we need an ending cue at this point. So we have one of 3 ending cues over here. And again, they need to seamlessly tie in to the main loops, and they are then there to create a strong resolution to a kind of a final note or chord to end the music. All right, that last resolve. Let me just play the raw files here. We'll start with 3 intros. Again, each cue needs to feel like they come from the same song. So all 9 files will use the same drum sounds, bass sounds, harmony, melody, instrumentation. You can change your melodic instrument and say, hey, now the pianos take the lead, now the horns take the lead, whatever it is. But there should be some change from one to the next. Intro 1. Intro 2. Intro 3. We already listened to the main loops here. Let's try one more time. We got a drum kit, we got a tuba for the bass, we got xylophones, some brass in the background. All right, oops. So let me play something else here for you. What about this one? So this is the final bounce, right? These are the 9 files. This is what you're going to turn into me. You don't need to turn in the session. I work just like I'm the client. I'm the game developer. You're the composer. I hire you to work on my games. I don't probably know all that much about your DAW, your composition, your session. I just want the WAV files to work in the game. So this is more of what a production session would look like. It's contacts loading up. Hold on. So what I would suggest you do is divide out 3 2-bar intros, 3 2-bar main loops, and 3 2-bar endings. No. 3 2-bar intros, 3 2-bar endings, and 3 8-bar main loops. So for this one, I have the B organ. Let's bring in the organ. Kit, piano, tuba, banjo, some live recorded acoustic guitar with the lead. We're not going with the Vox. That was a bad experiment. So if you set up 2 bars for each of your intros and then just build everything right below it. Set up 8 bars for your 3 8-bar loops, and you can kind of easily jump around and listen to everything. So I'm going to just start with the main loops so you can get a sense of what the whole thing's supposed to sound like, and that'll help with the intros and the outros. So drums, pianos, tuba, a little syncopation there, bluegrass lead, banjo lead, guitars, just doing some rhythmic stuff down below, organs. To the next one. Takes the tuba kind of as the lead. Third one. Notice that each instrument helps in the intro and the endings. Each instrument has a little bit of change from one to the next, a little bit of build, and 3 endings. The endings should start strong, but they should have a solid ending and fade out before the and each one of them has just a slightly different musical approach. So hopefully this gives you some ideas and direction for this composition. There's a couple more things I want to point out here. Digging back, where's that PDF go? Maybe it's back here. There it is. Let's see. Suggestions for composition. Compose interesting loops. Looping does not mean repetitive. A lot of times people hear the word loop and they think they're just going to repeat the same thing over and over again. The game is going to loop your WAV file, your 8-bar WAV file, enough by itself. You don't want to create like 2 4-bar loops in one 8-bar file. So what I end up getting is some pretty looping repetitive music, when instead you should be developing that melodic line across the entire 8 bars. You don't want the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars to sound identical. You want some development all the way through that 8 bars. Or even worse, sometimes I'll get 2-bar loops that go 4 times in an 8-bar file. So certainly watch out for that. Transitions, you want to make sure everything transitions from the first variation to the second variation, or intros to main loops to endings. You want to make sure all that stuff transitions smoothly. So keeping things in the same key, keeping things at the same tempo will prevent any sort of wild fluctuations. Maybe you can go to the relative minor, although in this type of game you probably, stay in a major key. It's probably the most fun anyway. But you can kind of go major to the relative minor. You can, with rhythm, you can go like half time, double time, to kind of move between pacing for everything, but don't like change to strong switches between different time signatures or non-related keys or anything like that, because it's going to be constantly switching. And 8 bars is not enough time to go off to some crazy cool new idea and then come back. So with longer games, that you have much more opportunity to do that. But in short 8-bar phrases that are switching around, strong changes to rhythm or harmony or rhythm or pitch or key or anything like that is going to be proved to be difficult. I think I said that. Keep same tempo. Continuous loops. You want no gaps or pops or clicks or fades, or when that file loops around, it should be seamless. You don't want to draw the attention of the player to the fact that they're in a loop, right? They don't want to go, oh, there it is again. Oh, I heard we started over again. You want to make it as invisible as possible. And the overall mix, you ultimately have control over the final mix because you're doing both music and sound effects. What you're really focused on is the relativity or the relation of the levels between your music and sound effects. But in general, you want to fill up the meter with as strong of a signal to noise ratio as possible without too much overloading or compression or limiting on your cue. You want to still have a strong dynamic range. You don't want to overload your output or your bounce too much. But also sometimes people have it cranked in their studio, and when they bounce it out, it's got this little tiny WAV file. So when we're thinking about the mix, we don't want anything on too extreme boundaries, right? Nothing that's way over too loud, way compressed, way limited, no dynamic range, distorting really, really too loud, or the waveforms are so quiet that they can't even really be heard amongst all the other sounds. So watch out for that balance there. you can and should and are encouraged to put your music in the game. Each week, you can take your finished WAV files and place them into the game so that they work. So let me show you that real quick. When you download everything, you download this assignment, you get the handy dandy application. So here is, oh goodness, oh no, what did I do? There we go. Here's the application. You can right-click on the application and do Show Package Contents. When you do Show Package Contents, it comes up with a folder called Contents. And in that folder, you will find a folder called Data. And inside of Data, you will find Streaming Assets. And inside of Streaming Assets, you will find two folders called Music and Sound Effects. You will eventually fill these folders up with your WAV files. You bounce out all 9 of your WAV files. Notice that they are named exactly like the asset list. You put them into this folder, and the next time you launch and play the game, you'll hear all your music, and it'll work. So always test out your music in the video game after you bounce it out of the DAW. You will probably find that the music in the game will sound just a little bit different, right? It may not be playing back as you expected it. It's not going to fundamentally like recompose your music or change your rhythm or your harmony or anything like that. But the way it plays, the way it loops, the way it switches may be different than what you expect. So again, you right-click on the assignment here, do Show Package Contents. You'll find Contents, and I don't really expect you to remember that folder location. So it's right here, Contents, Data, Streaming Assets, and Music. Right? You go to Contents, Data, Streaming Assets, and Music. Or eventually you'll do sound effects also. So always test out your music in the game before you deliver it. Make sure it is working. All right, we did that. Where am I going? Where did my movie go? Or my slides, I mean. All right, we don't need that anymore. All right, so that is 2D Platformer for this week. Definitely contact with me if you have any issues. Look over the assignment and start getting to work on it before Friday, and then we can realize any sort of issues that you might have and fix all of that. Hold on just a sec. So, your game for next week, week 2 game, is called Angry Bots. It is a futuristic first-person shooter game where there's a whole bunch of robots out to attack you, and you are this mercenary human in a suit that is infiltrating the robot factory, and those robots really don't want you there, and so they attack you, and there's a number of different robots, and each of those robots are going to have their own musical theme attached to them. So we'll be talking about how the music works. The music for this game is in a different approach. It's not going to focus on intros, main loops, and endings. The focus of the music for this game is the idea of ambient and action. This is also another common approach to music in games, where the idea of ambient or action, sometimes it's also known as exploration and battle, where there are parts of certain games where you're just wandering around lost or aimless for a very long time trying to figure out what to do next, or you're safe at this point and there's not much going on, and then all of a sudden the enemies come out and you have to engage in battle, and it's switching between lower intensity, lower paced level music to higher intensity, faster paced action or battle music. So how do we switch between those two different intensity levels, dynamic levels, and different pacing for the music? So this one is going to be much more of a modern production style. much more synths and drum machines and samplers and plugins and more electronic music sources and much more of a modern production style. And then we get that out of our system because the week after that, week 3, we are doing a strictly orchestral fantasy composition. So our game is called Palace of Orinthalion, and it's modeled after an open world fantasy game. And in this type of game, something like, I don't know, the Elder Scrolls series or The Witcher or Dragon's Age or Demon Souls or what else? Bloodborne and World of Warcraft, and there's tons of those games out there. And this sort of open world fantasy game is often you can go off in any sort of direction that you want. You can kind of approach the story in any sort of way, any sort of order. And some games require you to go like level 1 to level 2 to level 3, and you go from point A to point B to point C. But in sort of these open world games, you can start at point R and then go to D and then go to Z and then go to X and then A and then V and just jump all over the place in the storyline and the different gameplay. So how do we make a music soundtrack for a game where we don't know what order they're going to do or what's going to happen, right? In 2D platformer, you kind of know what's going to happen. You know the game's going to start, and then it's going to go in the main loop while the game plays, and then when you lose all your health points, it's going to end, right? Pretty straightforward. But with an open world fantasy game, there's a lot of different directions that the music can head. So it's orchestral composition, no drum machines, no synths, only your sample library's acoustic orchestral instrumentation for this game. And then the other assignments. I'll probably start out on Friday discussing these production technique and the technical assignment a little bit more in depth. But your production technique is looping music and setting up music in a couple of different, or creating loops in a couple of different ways. So one of the main things I want to point out now is that there is a workflow PDF. Along with this assignment, you get a 65-slide workflow that goes basically just step by step of exactly how to set up and work with this session and create all of the different types of loops. So, sorry, my screen's freaking out here. So definitely want to follow that. We'll start out our session on Wednesday with a discussion of how to work and create these loops. And then what else? Your technical assignment will have you bouncing your music from your game composition in multiple different files. So you'll see you have the 9 files, the 9 WAV files that you created for your game composition. You'll also bounce those out into 16-bit 22K stereo files. And then you'll take the same 9 files and bounce them out to 8-bit 22K mono core audio files. I'm not sure if you're familiar with CAF files or CAF files. Core audio files are the format that your Apple loops are in. And, oh, where did I go? It's like one of the main audio formats for Apple. It's one of their proprietary audio formats. It works really well for iOS iPhones and iPad devices. So we'll be in this assignment, you'll be delivering files into multiple formats. It's all about bouncing out the correct audio files and paying really close attention to the details of properly formatting the files. So that's generally the direction that we will be headed through the month. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. If you have any questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes after class and we can discuss whatever you'd like. But please get started on the assignments, download everything, play through the game, check out the assignments, read through the documentation, start on your composition, anything that you can do to get working on all of these assignments. And then have questions for me on Friday if you have any new ideas from working on the assignments. So let's wrap it up there. Have a good afternoon, and I will see you again on Friday. All right, thanks a lot.